All right, well, let us call the work session for the Tuesday, April 27th City Council meeting to order. And I believe we have to start with an identification of who is here. I don't know, Randy always does, it feels like it's a tradition. So, Councilman Higginson, can I ask you to start?
Millie Segura-Bar.
Kate Bradshaw.
Kendall Harris.
Chris Simonson.
All right, that means we are all here. The mayor has asked to be excused today. So we will turn our time over to Alan Johnson for a discussion about household solar power generation.
Do you see the green light?
There it is. I was going to say, well, Mayor Pro Tem and Council, it's great to be here tonight to spend a few minutes and kind of go over I don't know, you want to go ahead and our solar and kind of an update. I'm going to say to set a preference, we're not really here to propose anything, just sort of step through where we are, what we've got, and what we've got going. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Hopefully I'm here, and if you have questions, let's stop it. I'm hoping that we're going to leave time for questions at time, but please just interrupt me if you got a question and as we go through it. So, but I thought what I'd do is just start out. Some of the first thing I would do is just talk what are some of our system requirements are, our resource update, energy charges, our solar rates, next steps, if any, the direction that you would want to give, staff and the Power Commission to move forward with it here. So that's what I had anticipated being here today. So there's no apprehension that we'll be asking for anything here at the end. But anyways, I first start out here, what our obligations is to operate a safe and reliable system. And as we were talking about before, we now may have to put kid guards on our poles apparently, but like I say, that was a new one here. But we are also obligated to supply power to all our customers, regardless of the time, weather, or the seasons. And the other thing, being an enterprise fund, I thank you. As our funds that are received from customers, we have to, what we bring in, we basically comment all our bills up, and that's how we pay our bills to do it. And the one thing we'll talk a little bit more is the fact that we're actually required to balance our load on an hourly basis. And one of the things I want to talk about was the underground. And Councilman Higgins asked for some.
Thank you, Alan.
This one is an old, what they call the bare-centric neutral one, which this would be the replacement for it right there, because you can see it's got a shield on it. This one is the wire that we actually got approved the other day, and I got a bigger piece, because this isn't my bat to keep me out of trouble.
Wow.
But, you think about,
That's impressive.
they have to bend that up into the things.
Mm-hmm. So when they would
And here's a newer piece of what it looked like when it first comes out. And this,
So this replaces this?
yeah,
this is a connect. This is just a bigger one.
this is the one when they try to pull it out of the conduit under the ground. This outside neutral falls up and.
Wow.
So this is what it would look like when it went in new. And this is what it looks like after it's been there, and then it just all comes off and balls up.
covered.
It's
Why would,
got a cover on it,
yeah, why wouldn't they have covered, I mean, I understand that you want the neutral separate from the inside, but why wouldn't they have provided a cover?
It's technology. As we've talked about the fact, this bare-centric neutral cable, back in the 70s when they put it in, it had an estimated life of 20 years, which sounded like a long time. Well, it's now been in here for 40 plus years, some of it, and we're still trying to get it out. But when we go to pull it out, it balls up and makes a big mess. But anyway, we've still got, we do 18,000 feet of it, but we got about 20 years to get the rest of it gone at the rate we're doing. But this big one here is just a bigger cable. This is actually good for 600 amps. And if you try bending that, I mean, those guys are tougher than I am when they have to bring that up and bend it to get into the connections there. I mean, you wouldn't think it bend, but it gets a little longer than, it's like bending steel, you can do it. So
So question, if this is your replacement, how come these wires are still on the outside? Doesn't that still create the problem?
This right here it's got a high voltage termination on the end. And so when you bring it up to the end to hook it like into a transformer, like out in the park strip or a connection, this elbow on the end will plug into it. And then they bring the neutral back out, this bare wire, and they hook that to the ground grid.
But this is not underneath the
No,
ground
no, this is
anymore.
gonna be up out of the ground like in a transformer in a park strip. But I just wanna kind of show you that that one actually has a termination, a high voltage termination on it, so. Anyway, I just want to take a few minutes, but the point of it, when I'm talking about this, is we go across this, all of this cable, and then we'll talk about solar, I'll just say, all relies on the system working. So it doesn't matter whether you have solar, don't have solar. Anybody who's got underground wire, main feeds, are all going to be affected by this stuff. The other thing we've got is we've still got almost 5,000 poles on our distribution system. Since 2009, we've replaced roughly 1,300 of them. We've still got a handful of them, so we've got 3,000 of them remaining. I have another example. This is the number 6 wire, and you hear me talk about it. This is some of the old copper wire that was put out. This is a big piece, a bigger one, but this is some of the main lines that when I come back a month from now, talk about we're rebuilding 3100 South. This is the size conductor that we'll be putting up on there.
Is that the size that runs down the pole to the ground?
It can do, but it's also, we have several, probably 100 miles of up on the primary wires or something. So that is one of the things that we're working with as a group, rebuilding the line. So we don't just change the poles out. When we do that, we're changing the conductors, the insulators, the arms, the wires, the conductors, and everything. And I just thought while I was doing show and tell, that the one Councilman Higgins again, is the size that we're gonna be putting down 3,100 to get the main line that we're working on up through there. So it'll go down there and then it'll tie to the underground to the bigger one down into here.
So Alan, are these, I'm sorry, does this replace that little guy? No.
Well, it can do, but we have some smaller than that we do. I just brought this one just because it was the size, just to let you know that when we come on 3,100 and we're gonna rebuild the line, this is the size we'd be using on it. But we've got some that's the same type, but it's more like the size of your finger, or maybe some like your thumb that's smaller than there. So most of the stuff we're putting on would probably be about the size of my thumb that's replacing that little small wire. So anyways, that's some of the things that we're doing as a system overall. I just got a picture of, this is one of the poles that we actually had it at Power Commission. You look at the outside of it, it looks perfectly good, but you can see the inside of it is rotten. And you don't see it as you see it in the backyard because it looks good, but the structural strength is good. And that's basically one of the things when they tested that they found for us on these bad poles, as we pull them out where they're rotten on there. So we still work on that. And again, I point out, poles is something everybody needs regardless of how they get their power. And just to point out, we're averaging currently the 114 poles. We roughly have another 27 years at the rate. And like I said, we're looking to bump that up, but that's basically what we are. Again, for those, I apologize, that had to listen to this a couple weeks ago. I stole a couple of these slides. So anyway, coming back into it, one of the rate requirements is every customer, at least from our standpoint, needs to help fund some of the following items. They need to fund the fixed and variable costs of power, because you've got to have power and you've got to have the system to operate it. We need to fund the day-to-day operations and maintenance as we work our way through it. And we also need to fund system capital improvements. As you know, the power department not only is expensive maintenance-wise, but it's expensive capital-wise to keep going. So I just wanted a couple definitions really quick, that we measure power in kilowatts. And basically, a kilowatt is what you're using at one time. A kilowatt hour is how much energy you use over a period of an hour. So if you use 100 watts, that's a watt. But if you run it for an hour, you get 100 watt hours. So I mean, it's the watt hour is a period of time. I also bring up, sometimes I get in trouble because I go from a mil to cents to dollars because they translate that we buy power, but a mil is basically 1/10 of 1 cent. The other thing I wanted to bring back is our residential customers, because that's really kind of where we're going to be focusing today, are billed for their kilowatt hour, their energy. When we buy the power, we got to buy it by the hour. But when we turn around and we sell it to our customers, it's been a tradition that we have done for umpteen years, is we just sort of bunch it all together and we give them an average cost for a pile of power. So that's basically what we're billing, and then they have a monthly customer charge on top of it. Commercial customers are metered and billed both the energy that are also billed on what a demand, and I'll talk a little bit more what demand is and why we do that here in just a second. But that's, again, just the point that our kilowatt customer, our customers, residential, we just send them, we read the meter the first of the month, the end of the month, and we just glump it together, and we're just trying to give everybody an average cost. And we're trying to do that for ease of billing, ease of, rather won't have to chase everybody hour by hour like we have to do.
Alan, is that the same practice that Rocky Mountain Power uses in terms of how they charge residential customers versus commercial customers?
It is, yeah. And I will just say, there's a lot of spin-offs if you're starting to look at time of day metering and different demand charges on residential. There are things that are in the works, but right now we're basically following the same thing that Rocky Mountain's doing, yes. The other thing I just wanted to remind us is that AC power is what we use on our system, and it can't be stored. It's not like the battery in your car. You know, you can store it and use it when you want. If we turn the lights on, there's really a generator has to turn up a little bit harder to do it. I mean, but everybody's going up and down, but it's still, you use more power, you have to put more energy, you have to generate more power. So basically it has to be produced as you're needed. And of course, that's what we use for our lights, our air conditioning, hair dryers, vacuums, whatever is AC. So just as a reminder as we go through this. Some of the things that we do is when we purchase power, again, we're billed on an hourly basis, which means every single hour we're looking at our load and we're looking into the future and we're guessing how much load the system's going to use. You're looking at clouds, the weather, patterns and everything, but we balance it. And if we miss it, then we go in what they call the pool, where basically we sell it back at a lower cost, or we have to buy it, it ends up being a higher cost. The rate for this is market driven, which tells you the hottest day is going to be more money, a cold day is going to be cooler. In the wintertime, the colder days are more expensive than the mild days, but it's market rate when you need it. We have a demand charge that's included with all of our power that we bring in, because we have to bring all of our power, with exception of what we generate at our power plant and our Echo Hydro with the line that goes over the mountain. All the rest of it comes in through Rocky Mountain, so we have to pay a demand charge. But because of the size of our power plant, and because we got the ability to start and stop it, we actually have to pay a demand charge even on our power plant, so it's not exempt from it either. Typical way you buy power is in blocks of power. And this is where the rub starts coming in. This is what they call high load hours. And that begins at 8 o'clock in the morning and goes to 11. And then off-peak power starts at 11 and goes till 8 in the morning and all day Sundays. So basically, if you're buying power, what they call the high load hours to cover your peak period, you have to start at 8 o'clock in the morning and it's a solid piece. And this will mean more as we get through a little bit more as we start talking about what our load pattern is a little bit. Or you can buy it flat, which means it just comes 24 hours a day. Now, some of the things that we have flat, like our hydro plant would be flat when it's got run of the river. It just goes day and night. Our San Juan coal plant or IPP are flat. We have got some market power that we bought that's flat, and we have some that are high load. We don't buy much low load because of our load is lower at night, and we cover it basically. Going back through our resources, just to kind of follow through what we do have, and I will tell you, currently right now, about 40% of our resources come out of hydro. And we're actually going to be somewhat higher than that once we start bringing our solar resource in that we'll talk about here in just a minute. But we got the Colorado River, which just under 40% of our power comes from. And that's also, they've got the ability to pattern that. We have to have a base load component, and then we have so much that we can pattern to fill the needs of what we need to do.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So some of our power resources that are dependent on water, do we expect some shortages if they're because of a drought or?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the Colorado River is really low. They're talking about potentially going into a drought thing where they're going to lower the energy. We'll get the energy, but lower the sustainable energy in the future. Our 2 hydro plants, neither one of the reservoirs are anticipated to fill this year. In fact, Echo is only 8 feet above the point where we have to shut it down already. Now, there's still a little snow up there, but yeah, we anticipate that our Echo power plant this year will be probably shut down shortly after the 4th of July this year. So we're going to have to be stretching a little harder through the summer months. So anyway, good question. So anyway, we do have the IPP project that's a coal plant that's going to be running through 2025 that we currently have 30 megawatts, and with 18 months we can call that back, or 18 months notice. After 2025, it will be converted to a gas plant, and our allotment will be dropped down to 13 megawatts at that point. We do have 32 megawatts of natural gas at our plant down in Bountiful. And just to say, we've got gas hedged out for our summer months through 2026. We've got the 5 megawatts from our San Juan project, which is a coal project that's slated to shut down June of 2022. So just a little over a year from now, that plant will be shut down. And again, we talked a little bit about our hydro plants. We do have other contract purchases that we have got hedged out at different rates and out through the summer months, out through March of 2027. So we are doing our best to keep looking into the future. But we've also got some solar purchases that we have already proven we're doing.
Before you go off of that one real quick, I had a question.
Sure.
So with the San Juan plant shutting down next summer and the drought projected to be longer than just this summer, probably next summer too, do you think you'll call back any of the IPP in the next 18 months?
There is a chance. We'll have to make that decision before December. So either by December, we will probably either go out and buy, say, market power, which right now the future rate of that is higher than IPP. So my guess, if it stays the way it is, we probably will call some IPP back for next summer.
Thanks.
But like I say, we'll be making some other changes that we're going to be plowing new ground. One of the things as you looked at it, you got to layer resources in at the right time. But we have been able to go out and we've purchased 2 solar contracts. And one of the things that's worked out really well here is that we're able to buy these contracts at the same time some of our hedge power dropped, and we've got our hedge power refigured to match in with the solar power. And I'm going to say it's going to give us a stretch, and like I say, because this solar power, even though it's utility grade and one's got a tracking, it still does not cover our system peaks. I mean, we're going to stretch to get through our peaks with this. But coming back, we got these 2 projects, and basically between the 2 of them, there's 12 megawatts, or basically 1,200 homes have solar panels on it. It's, like we were putting them in the city. And one of the things that these are 25-year contracts, which is both happen to be starting June of 2022, which coincides really well with our San Juan project going down. But the Red Mesa one, it's 2.3 cents with a 2% escalator. So over the 25 years, the average cost is 2.9 cents. The Still Solar project has a 25-year, but it's got a flat fee of 3.1 cents. So basically, we're sort of somewhat setting what solar rates would be to go out and buy it at this point.
Historically, what does our hydropower cost us? Our personal hydropower, Echo and Pineview. Is there a way to know that?
Yeah, because we track it, and our personal hydropower is costing us something in the neighborhood of 3 cents. But you've got to remember, we've capitalized it, and then we've ignored all the capital in the front of it. And again, Echoes, if we start looking at it, we just put a little over $1 million into it last year. We ought to put another $1 million-ish or so into the controls. So they're going to go back into more of an expensive mode again. But at this point, all we really have to pay is our FERC fees, the water user fees, and our maintenance on. So our hydros have been very really inexpensive, even though they run for a short period of time in the summer. And they really match up really well with our need in the summer power, so. But again, well, I don't want to come back on this solar, and I want to be fair with it, that we still have transmission and demand charges and losses. We've got a transmission rate of basically an eighth of 1 cent. And we also have 5% losses, which means when we schedule power, when we schedule it in, we're only getting 96% or 95% of it here. The other 5% we have to give to Pacific Corp to use their lines, plus pay them a dollar figure. So when you come back, our average cost of power for the solar delivered is going to be roughly this 3.8 or 3.9 cents, or just under 4 cents, delivered here to the city. And when we talk about demand, and demand's always the toughest animal to try and explain, and I've tried to do it a lot of ways. I'm going to try something a little different. But I want to point out, every customer in our system affects our system demand, whether you have solar or not. And I'll show you an example of that here in a minute. Because all customers use power in the evening, and then towards the end of the day when the sun's not shining, when we get our peak. But how I come up with this, and you can tell me if it's any good, is trying to figure it out. My kilowatt hour, my bucket, is a pile of dirt. I mean, I've got a dump truck that's come in, it's dumped a pile of dirt here in my yard. Well, if I've got 6 hours, I can use my little lawn tractor, and I can take a little scoop and I can move it out of the way. My lawn tractor costs me X amount of dollars. But if I've got this pile of dirt and it's sitting somewhere I've got to move it in 20 minutes or 15 minutes, then I've got to get a great big loader to move it. Well, that big loader is more expensive. Essentially what this loader or the tractor is, this is my transformer, it's this wire, it's the substation, the generator. Everything has to be bigger to supply demand. So demand is, how fast do I have to move this pile of dirt? I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that's kind of trying to come back to what demand is. So as we look at it, if we have a bigger demand, we have to have bigger transformers, bigger wire, bigger generators, and that translates all the way from our 138 substation to the 46 to our substation, right down to the transformer in front of your house. So,
Alan,
yes, Gary.
I'm going with your analogy here. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we have to provide, we have to have a tractor big enough to meet our peak demand too.
Absolutely.
Right. So it's not a matter of us being able to even buy a little tractor. It's we have to be able to at any moment provide as much horsepower as we possibly can, because we may have that much that we have to move. Right.
Absolutely. And my point, what I'm trying to say is, our system has to be big enough to carry the demand of the system, because at this point, solar, which we're buying, or solar on rooftops, does nothing to help with us our peak. We still have to put a tractor big enough to cover our peak. And what you're going to find as I go through the examples, I've got a couple real live examples of a couple customers, and you can kind of see more what I'm talking about when I get there. And I hope it makes more sense as it all comes together. For those of you who've seen this chart, I apologize, but this is basically our last August. And you look in here and you can see the kind of, I don't know what color it looks on the screen here, kind of a goldish color in the middle. That's our pre-schedule, and hid behind it's a blue line, and you can see here in a second, I'll show you where it is, where our real load is gone. The kind of purple line on top is the temperature. The squiggly line on the bottom, which is kind of a lighter purple, I guess, that's our generation. And you notice it doesn't go clear to zero because it's picking up what our hydropower is from Echo. But you'll notice the lines on the bottom, some are bigger, some are wider, some of them are really pencil. And we're able to match what our needs are to the system by what we can control down at the power plant to do that. I also want to point out, on the very last day, you'll notice a storm come through last day of August. So just to point out, we're going from something in the neighborhood of 22 to 25 megawatts up to 80 megawatts in the matter of a month, but also in a day here. But the 2 points that I really want to talk about is around the kind of brownish circle. You see the 2 little points sticking out. This is when an anomaly happened last summer that we talked about, but I just kind of want to give you a little bit bigger idea what went on. You'll notice down below that the little blue line is Air Products, and you'll notice that it's up and down, kind of like a sawtooth there. That's because they're interruptible and we shut them down. And here's a snapshot of this day. And you're going to notice on here I've layered in the resources. The blue on the bottom is our CRSP, and you can see what it is. You can see invariably San Juan, the first couple hours, there's kind of a purple there, and it disappears after the 3rd hour. It went off with a tube leak, which means it was shut down. The yellow again is coming back, and this was the power that we have went out and hedged and pre-bought. And you can see the last hour, how it drops down. That's the 24th hour as we're talking about. The red lines in here up towards the top is our power plant. You can see where we were able to start it earlier in the day, maxed out the full 30 megawatts, but we can only go so far. So the item we really want to talk about is this little piece of kind of goldish color on the top there. That's where we had to go out and buy from the market. Well, I've hedged this black line that comes across here, and this is what we were paying for power. So up in this top portion up into here, you're going to see that it's up there 70. We were paying 75 cents a kilowatt for power for that point. So basically, every customer that, you know,
Selling it for what?
we were paying, I'm getting the right thing. We were paying 75 cents and selling it for 9. So I'm saying, and I'm not a really good math guy, but even without a calculator, I can see that doesn't work real well. But the point of it is as we get back into it, and I just took kind of a little squiggly red line to kind of get, obviously we don't have this much solar, but that's basically where the solar patterns are. So you can see as it starts dropping down at the same time our peak's coming up. And that's because solar does not cover our system peak. It does not cover the demand that we have on our system that we have to build that tractor for as we get into it. So now we're going to get back more into the meat of the solar here, which is why I guess we're here. But I just want to point out that we have currently 194 net metering customers. We have 6 commercial customers. And we have 32 of the feed-in tariff, and this was the rate that we changed in 2017, and I'll go back more into that. There are also quite a few smaller panels that, you know, we know they're there, but they haven't told us they're just putting them on the roof. You know, some of the things that you get is it's obvious that if you want to get the most kilowatt hours out of it, you put it facing south. That gets the most kilowatt hours, that brings the most return back in on the solar panel. It doesn't really bring it when we need it the most, but it brings the most kilowatt hours. The one thing about net metering is it allows a customer to bank up credits during the day and use them when their system's not generating later on. The thing that we're finding is people are not sizing their systems for their needs. They're sizing them at the maximum amount, looking to get a return on their money. Again, it's possible they could leave a customer with a 0 electrical bill and even a credit, but they may not be using their own power. We are using them as a bank and coming back, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. Again, kind of a pictorial view of it, the net metering. So you got the solar panels, the inverter, and the meter. Well, on net metering, the first thing it does when you generate is going to come from the solar panel through the inverter, and it's going to get used right in the house. And we don't see that. You know, then that seems like a very fair way to do it. I mean, I buy that. And then their excess power is going to be given back to us. And what you hear them say, well, if I don't use it, my neighbor does. Well, maybe the neighbor does. Maybe the system doesn't really need it. But essentially, you're taking in power when they don't need it, and there's a good chance their neighbor doesn't really need that much either, and the system doesn't need it. And we're buying this block of power, and we may be accessing trying to sell it off at that point. But what you're going to find is that's runs between 50 to 70% of the power that is generated is being pushed back onto the system. And then basically, Yes, Gary?
Just so I understand, make sure I'm clear too. That's not because they aren't using power, it's because they're generating it at a time when they can't use it.
Yeah, I mean, they're still gonna be using some power. They're just over-generating for what their current use is. Again, comes back, they can't store it. It generates whatever it is. If they're not using anything like, say, 8 o'clock in the morning, everybody's got up, they've gone to school, there's nothing there but the refrigerator. The rest of the power is just going out onto the system, and we're basically being a battery for them at that point. Does that make sense? Okay. So basically, again, the grid power, then we sell it back to them at a retail rate. Now I've just got 2 examples. I mean, I could have gone through all of them, but I've kind of found 2 that I wanted to portray something. The first thing you look at is this customer here. I mean, and this was last calendar year, so January 20 to December of 20. And you can see on the 3rd column over is the total production. So you can see in January, their solar panel produced 414 kilowatt hours. They sold us 150 of them. Essentially, we bought 36% of it. You know, it wasn't so bad. But if you roll it down here, when you get down into December, they produced 704, which is not, but they sold 507. We bought 72% of their power. So this customer here, we bought 60% of their power that they generated. So they only used 40% of their own power. But on top of that, when you start looking at the demand, like we talked about the tractor, constantly through the month, they used between 24 to 29 kW of demand on the system. So even though they generated 13,000 kilowatt hours, they sold us 8,000, sold 60% of their power. So when they weren't using it, we took it and had to do something with it and then give it back when they wanted it to. And on top of it, we still had to supply our generation at the plant or buy peak power or whatever we had to do to meet that peak demand on our system. Now, maybe you say, well, okay, but you just chose one big one, so I tried to find a smaller one. And you'll notice that the demand on this one is much smaller. But you're also going to notice, even though it's smaller, they sold us 71% of the power it generated. So they really only used 30% of the power that they generated. Now, if you take all 200 of these customers again, and last year was one of our better years because the summer months had warm nights. It started out warmer in the morning. They used more power. We took back 55% overall for the month for all the customers of power that they didn't generate. So basically, as a whole, the customers used 45% of the power, of their own power. Huh?
What month was that?
Last in calendar year 2020.
So in calendar year 2020, generally, just as an average, we bought 45%.
50, no, yeah, excuse me, I said that wrong. We bought 45% of their power.
Bought
They used
45.
55% of it.
So can I ask, I thought, I was under the impression that people with solar panels on their homes do not actually generate their own power, that they sell it all back, right?
That's our current plan, yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll go, this was the net metering plan.
Okay.
So can you go back to your, the list of net metering versus feed-in tariff? So 194 plus 6, so 200 of the customers are using their own power, or what it turns out to be more like half of their own power. Those 32 feed-in tariff customers are giving all of their power to the city, and we're giving it back.
And we'll go through the feed-in tariff one, the same type of an example. I just wanted to show it. So basically, like I say, and the rate is the same thing. As excess, they get the first 400 for 8 cents, and anything over that's the 10 cents, just like everybody else gets. Now, the feed-in tariff is, as you're saying, is a little bit different, Kendall, is they're coming back in here, and they generate all of the power. And what we've got is we have a meter on here that can tell what time of day it is, and it puts it in different buckets. And then the power goes out the grid and it comes back to them, and so they basically buy all their power at the grid power pricing. And what this ends up being is we take these customers, we pay them 4 cents for all the power they generate from midnight, which obviously they're not doing anything at midnight, until noon. And it happens to be that they generate 31% of their power at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I'm going to surmise that's the same thing that we're getting with our other ones that they're not using, and they're giving it all back to us, and that's mostly when we're getting our power. The middle of the afternoon, from noon until 4, we're paying them 6 cents, and that's where 50%, a little over 50% of the power is generated. And then the last ones were from 4 p.m. until 12, which just means you'd have to have a solar that's on the west side of the house or west facing to get, because east side's going to shut off by noon. The south side peak happens about 2, and by about 4 o'clock, it's petered out and is gone. So this is that we have a few. We got about 18%, and we pay them 9.2 cents from that 4 p.m. So basically, we're giving them what used to be full rate, but as we played with the rate a little bit, we're paying them 17% the full rate, but it's coming when it is worth it to us on the system. But again, we take all the power at that point. So, and again, you do have some of the small ones, just to kind of show a couple pictures. These are the ones that we know they're there, but they haven't done anything. They just hooked them up. Or you've got the larger ones, which you're putting them on, basically covering their whole roof. Weather conditions is also another issue. As you start getting into it, this panel here, because it's got snow on it like this, will basically shut it off. And like I say, so basically they're not producing. So this day it's cold, we would have to supply 100% of their energy this day, because until the snow melts off, their solar panels are shut off. Not that we shut them off, it's just the nature it can't go through the snow. And also the location, if it's on the east side of the house, again, you get 8 o'clock in the morning till noon, and that sun gets crossing over it, just basically shuts it down. So again, just to reiterate, like I say, there's a customer charge of $16 versus $12. So the net metering or the feed-in tariff pay of $4 for the additional to try and help make up for what they're not putting into the maintenance of the system. The same rate as we do for all the other customers, it's 8 cents for the first 400 kilowatt hours and 10 cents for the above 400 with the energy credits, with the 3 different tiers that come down through it. So. And we talked about what the other rates are, so I pulled up what Pacific Corp is, because they're mandated that they have to have a net metering rate. I mean, as a city, we don't have to do it, but they've had 3 rates. They had their rate 135, which again, that was closed in November of 2017, where they would purchase the excess power at a little over 8 cents. And they had another one that after from 2017 to 2020, they had the 136. Basically, I'll point out that these have a termination date. The first one will go to 2035. The 136 goes to 2032, and they'll pay them 9.2 cents. Their current rate that they've got right now, that they've just come out with a year or so ago, is they purchase the excess power at 5.9 cents during the summer months, or 5.6 cents in the winter months from October through May. So that is what Pacific Corp is doing. So they've brought their excess power down, and we've all seen on the news where people agree, don't agree with it. We could go through all the cities, but you got the cities who have, some of them went to the feed-in tariff and have backed away for the complexity and gone back. Most of them are buying their power somewhere between 4 to 5 cents on the excess to, like Murray, who's not done anything, still giving the regular rate. So, but I thought this is the one you compared to closest around our neighbors, so I put it back up onto there. So,
Alan, I have a question about
Okay.
the feed-in tariff residents versus the net metering tariff, or net metering residents. Since I wasn't serving at the time that decision was made, So we've left our residents in these two tiers, depending on if they were pre-2017 or after 2017. You know, Rocky looks like they roll at expiration their residents into whatever their current rate is at. Why at the time did the city elect to leave the existing customers in net metering rather than move everyone to feed-in tariff?
Because you have to rewire the house. Basically, as a net metering, you have to have a meter that comes into the house that measures whether it's going in or it's going out. In the feed-in tariff, we take that same meter and put it on the generation. And some of the things we did it back then, it was billing constraints of trying to get something that worked with our current billing, because, you know, for 200 customers, you hate to jump into a whole new billing cycle and rewrite software for it. So we were dealing with what the billing system was capable to do. Since then, we've made some upgrades and some changes, which have got some limited amount. I mean, to go back to what Pacific Corp's doing, seasonality, I think, would probably cause a fair amount of grief to our billing folks. But that being said, you know, there are some things we could do now, technology-wise, meter-wise, that we could do. But in order to change, if we were to say everybody's going to feed-in tariff, these 194 or 200 would have to go back on their house and physically remove all their electric equipment and reconfigure it for the other configuration that comes with it.
Is the same true for the 32 feed-in tariff? If, for just the sake of example, the city were to move back to a net metering system, would those 32 people have to rewire, or could you, or is it easier because there's
No, they would have to rewire also. I mean, and that's why probably if you were to come back and decide we wanted to do something different, you'd probably grandfather and let them stay there and have the option if they wanted to stay there, or if they, for some reason, thought the other rate was better or whatever, and they wanted to rewire their house, they'd have to rewire it to match to get onto the other rate, so.
Is it true that all of Rocky Mountain Power's customers had to transition to the new plans? I thought that they.
No, like I say, the ones that went on, closed in 2017 are able to stay on that rate until 2035. And the second one, they stayed till 2032. So like I say, at that point, then I'm assuming they'll all go to the same rate, or by then there might be 3 or 4 more rates. I don't know what they'll do there, but they have locked in the first 2 rates to a time year where we didn't, all we did with our net metering when we made the change is just say, we're going to lock you in that it's a net metering rate, but we're not going to guarantee a rate, just the rate formula being a net metering type rate, where they've come back in and guaranteed them the excess purchase price, or at least that's my understanding from what I read off what they've got published. So. And that was really all I had as far as, I don't know if we had any questions. I don't know how well I've done.
You did great. So Ellen, I know that it's easy for someone like me to say, hey, we should let people use the power they generate. I know that it's not really as simple as that, but I'm just wondering if you could kind of walk us down the scenario. I mean, even although everyone needs to, although there are costs associated with being a part of the grid, at some point we can pinpoint what those costs are. And so even if we say, okay, you have to pay this fee, and even if maybe it's even a high fee or something like that, I just wonder how hard it would be to have an option where people can use their own power. So what are tell me your thoughts.
Well, let's go back and say that if we all wanted to go back to net metering, and again, just we're good to do whatever you want to pass back, and the Power Commission will hassle and come back with any recommendation or follow what you want. But one of the things that, looking at it is there's two things, Kendall, and if I follow what it is what would we need to be? We could come back a whole billing structure and say, similar to what you'd maybe a water system. We're going to calculate what our fixed costs are, and it's pretty easy to do. We could come back and say every customer has to pay a base charge every month, whether they use any electricity at all, $36 a month or $50 a month, whatever that number is. Well, the problem is you get a little small person and they're going to start screaming because they're going to get a $36 charge and then $3 worth of power. If I'm one of these bigger ones, like the example that I used, that $36 gets lost in their $800 power bill. So basically you get some inequalities. But the other thing, what happens is we start deviating just like we are now very, very far from Pacific Corp. People are saying, well, wait a minute, how do we match up to them? The other option is this excess power. And I kind of use the scenario of the excess power. And I use the analogy all the time that, we have the local Ford store. And how long would I last as a manager if I came to you and says, I want to support the local Ford store, so I'm going to pay twice as much for a truck as I could go to Salt Lake and buy it for. And that's really where the rub is coming with the solar, is because we are basically taking as an average 50% of the power and paying them the full retail rate for it. And essentially what they are is they become a generator at that point. And the rate of it is, years ago, to be honest, if you was to buy solar back when these guys did, and the reason why we didn't, everybody wanted to pay charges 15 cents for solar that we're now buying for 3 cents. And we come in, we're not willing to pay that, and we've held off. We've had opportunities multiple times to pay 15 cents for it. And that's where it says, so if you was to come back and everything went back to, say, net metering, and it's fair. I absolutely agree with the fact that if they're taking this first power here and it comes back to them, I don't see that's any different buying a high-efficient refrigerator or better light bulbs. And I fully agree with that. Where the problem comes in is when we start setting this rate of what we're selling it back to the customers. Because basically, if I'm paying 9 cents for this power or 8 cents, and it comes in at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it happened to happen on that August day, I bought it from them at 8 cents, even though I could buy it for 3 cents. So I've overpaid in the morning. And then I've had to do something with it. I've had to sell it. I've had to move it. But anyway, I've been their battery. Then come the end of the day, I'm going to turn around and give it back to them when I'm paying 75 cents. So not only did I pay for it in the morning, I've got to pay additional money to give power back to the system. Because, I'm trading it. The other analogy I use all the time is you're giving me hot dogs in the morning, you want steak back in the afternoon, and you're calling it a fair trade.
Alan, I have a question. I know we are getting close on our time for our work session. If we were to ever consider a return to a full net metering program, but we were to adjust our rates to follow either 2 or 3 time periods with different rates that stayed closer to what we're able to purchase commercial solar for, so playing either plus 3 cents or minus 3 cents depending on the time of the day, do you think that would get us closer to being given hot dogs and still feeding them hot dogs?
Absolutely, yeah. It's, again, there's technology that is different today than there was in 2017. Making a decision today, to be honest, if I was to come back in, we probably would have stayed with net metering and set the buyback rate at what was more of an applicable real market value for that extra power. Now, that's going to upset people who have bought it because you've got people who, even though they assumed it was going to be set forever, and you have people, I have different people that tell me that you've got to do something different. I can't afford to pay my solar bill and you both. You need to do something. And so you've got people, unfortunately, that, you know, when we try talking to the customers that talk to us, and some of them say, well, yeah, but I believe this guy more than you, and we're gonna go for it. There are those customers that their systems have been in the right location, they've matched up and they've done real well. There are other customers out there that, on a net metering, big systems, and I'm understanding they're paying $30,000 to $40,000 for them. That if we was to charge them an extra $20 a month, they wouldn't even make any money. They're generating that little power because they're in shade and they're just not generating any power. So there's been, unfortunately, a lot of people's been taken advantage of, in my opinion, by salesmen, not all of them, but some of them. But again, if you was to come back and set the rate, allow them to use their own, and set that excess rate of what the applicable rate is that you're buying, at that point, they're taking care of them behind their own. The excess comes out and it's not coming back to the fellow customers to pick up the difference, because essentially what you're doing is you're taking this extra power and you're selling it higher than we can buy power from. And it's your neighbors that are basically saying, oh, here, I want to give you extra money for this thing. And it's not really helping the system. It's not drawing our demand. We can't put smaller transformers. We can't put smaller wires because, as you're saying, all our demands are happening after the solar is shutting off anyway. So it's not stopping any of the expenses. It's just costing us more for power costs to do this. So again, if you was to come with a rate that moved the excess power down into closer to a wholesale rate matching what we can buy solar for, there would be very little argument other than the fact they're taking whatever cream they want and giving you the excess, where now we're take the whole amount for the good of the system. So
I would like to discuss that. I think it would be nice if we could have a, work session or something soon and discuss it.
So given that we're at the time, usually when we break, Alan and Gary, what feedback would you like from us real quickly so that you know what next steps to take? Is that the type of feedback that you'd like that
yeah,
council?
if that's good, we'll be glad to take that back to the Power Commission.
I'll make one comment. I think that we also need to keep in mind that the customers who have been sold a specific equation on how their power system or their solar system is going to pencil out for free have been sold things that aren't necessarily realistic. And once we start adjusting those rates, they're going to see that there really isn't the money available in their savings, power savings, to pay for their system. So those who have existing systems are going to feel good that they're using their own power. Those who have solar sales folks sitting down with them at their coffee table are going to realize that there's no way in the world that at those lower reimbursement rates, their system's ever going to pay for itself. So, I mean, that's just the reality of where things are. I'm happy to discuss it, but I don't think we're going to generate a whole bunch more solar customers, and I don't think we're going to make anybody happy, except those existing folks who will feel good using their own power. So.
Anyone else want to offer any direction?
Mayor Pro Tem, could I just take a moment?
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you. Would Paul Summers please come up? He's a member of the Power Board. Paul, would you please come up?
What did I do wrong now?
I would just like to recognize this particular weekend, Rotary International District 54-7 had its conference in St. George. And the Rotarian of the Year for the whole state of Utah is Paul Summers.
Wow.
Nice.
Thank you, Paul.
It was a great honor, and I appreciated it.
And Chris, would you like
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you.
to further discuss solar rates?
Absolutely.
Sweet.
So my 2 cents is I'd be interested in either a work session or I'd quite frankly be interested in a recommendation from the Power Commission as my 2 cents. Looking at a net metering plan that matches our wholesale solar rates in terms of an excess sell. I'd also be interested in additional discussion or a recommendation on whether you would leave the the customers that are in the existing two plans as is for forever, till the sale of their house, to some date in the future. You know, each of those three options is to whether they stay in these two segregated systems or some new third system that we might think up.
Okay. Be glad to do that.
The only thing that's maybe unclear is whether or not you want the Power Commission to chew on this for a while and bring back a recommendation, or you want another work session before they do that.
I think, for me personally, I think it would be nice if the Power Commission discussed it and then came with a recommendation where we could hear their recommendation and discuss it.
In a work session.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with that as well, with our power experts chewing on it.
I agree.
I agree. My only one addition to that request would be if we could have more than just one recommendation, if we could have maybe a few different paths that we could go down, as opposed to just one. So
Absolutely.
So we
Yeah,
have
that's-
maybe 2 or 3 options,
Yeah,
and the
well,
pros and cons of each. That would
We
be helpful for me.
we could do that. We could look at, churn back through, dig deeper into it, see what we think would make sense, whether we options of grandfather, and, yeah, we could put several different options and to come back and discuss it again.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
That's awesome.
Councilman
But
Higginson, do you have?
Just so I'm
great with
Okay.
the suggestions that have been made.
And just so I understand and Alan understands, the goal is to find options to let people use their own power, and then to bring back recommendations on how that might be accomplished and what the pros and cons of those would be, right?
Yes.
Yes, I
And
do
I
think
would-
we
I would
want to
probably go-
acknowledge that letting people use the power they generate, but if they want to sell power back to the city, I think at that point, I'm interested in what is fair and equitable to all the residents of the city at the sell back point. But I think allowing them to use what they generate on their own roofs internally is something that I feel is, that they should be able to do.
I would just say the one clarification, is there any kind of timetable that you would like to see this?
What seems reasonable to you?
Well, obviously, I think we need to have something done before the solar comes online next year. I mean, so we ought to at least as a minimum be doing it through budget sessions as we work through the rates next year. My question is, did you want something that happened quicker than that? I mean, summer, as we're moving into, is always a dicey time for the power department to get through. I mean, we'll do whatever, but it's,
I think it'd be nice, as soon as you feel like it's possible, for you to look at it, examine it, and come back with a recommendation, whatever time that you need, but
okay, that's fine. I just,
I would say it would be nice if it could be like within a few months, or whatever seems reasonable.
okay. That's why I was just looking to see what you're thinking of direction of the timetable would be, so,
All right.
all right.
Okay, how about we take just a few minute break so that we can adjourn from the work session and then reconvene in our council session?
Thank you.